I am very happy with the initiative of the Newman Center to have a series on the virtues, and I feel honored to give this introduction. Talking about virtues. Isn't that nowadays out of date, a bit old-fashioned? Do we really need a moral roadmap? Can man not design his own moral code? The famous philosopher and apologist Peter Kreeft had an interesting experience in the roaring 60s when he gave a course on ethics in Boston College to a new generation of freshmen. They rejected this old stuff of imposed values and wanted to be creative in forming a new and better world. So Kreeft decided to play the role of Socratic questioner. What kind of society do you really want? One with double standard? No. One with harmony, togetherness and cooperation? Yes. What about greed? No capitalism or materialism. Small and beautiful, and away with legalism, moralism, and guilt to pursue our own happiness. So the students wrote down their blueprint for a better and more human society. But then Professor Kreeft showed them that this design for a better world had been written down already many centuries ago by the Greek philosopher Plato in his work The Republic, written in the 4th century before Christ. After this surprising discovery, the creative students wanted, of course, to read more of this old stuff about virtue. And they read Aristotle, St. Augustine, and even St. Thomas of Aquinas. And they liked especially his treatise on happiness. This rediscovery of ethics based on virtues is also seen in the work of some modern philosophers. Alasdair MacIntyre, one of the great moral thinkers of the late 20th and early 21st century, calls the Aristotelian Thomistic tradition the best theory so far, both of how things are and how we ought to act. The modern liberal society, born out of Enlightenment individualism, is morally empty. He writes in his most famous work, After Virtue, written in 1981. Against thinkers like Nietzsche and Sartre, who in their relativistic approach deny any moral rationality, MacIntyre revives the tradition of Aristotelian ethics, where you can find purpose because of its teleological focus on the good and on moral actions. Achieving the goods that are internal to a practice requires the presence of the virtues, he says. And in After Virtue, he defines the virtues in terms of practices. A virtue, he says, is an acquired human quality, the possession and the exercise of which tends to enable us to achieve those goods which are internal. So about virtue. The word virtue comes from the Latin virtus, and that word comes from the Latin vir, that means man. Virtue meant originally courage, especially in war, but it also means moral strength, high character, goodness, manliness, bravery. The Catechism of the Catholic Church defines virtue as a habitual and firm disposition to do the good. It allows the person not only to perform good acts, but to give the best of himself. The virtuous person tends toward the good with all his sensory and spiritual powers. He pursues the good and chooses it in concrete actions. We have, on the one hand, the three so-called theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, which are infused by God in the souls of the faithful to make them capable of acting as his children on a supernatural level. And we have the human virtues, which are acquired by human effort. 4 of them are especially important and therefore called cardinal virtues, from the Latin word cardo, that means hinge. They are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Prudence. Prudence is the ability to discern the appropriate course of action to be taken in a given situation at the appropriate time. Being prudent doesn't mean being shy or afraid, or should not be confused with duplicity or dissimulation. Prudence guides the other virtues by setting rule and measure. Justice. According to Aristotle, justice is moderation or mean between selfishness and selflessness, between having more and having less than one's fair share. It inclines to render to God and to our neighbor what belongs to them. Then fortitude is also called courage, forbearance, strength, or endurance. Fortitude is the ability to confront fear, uncertainty, and intimidation, to resist temptations and to overcome obstacles in our moral life. Temperance is also known as restraint, self-control, abstention, sobriety, or the tempering of our appetite. Temperance is the virtue that moderates attraction and desire for pleasure and provides balance in the use of created goods. St. Thomas of Aquinas calls it a disposition of the mind which binds the passions. The cardinal virtues are already mentioned in the Old Testament book of Wisdom, and Plato regards them as the 4 most desirable character traits. Why are the cardinal virtues important, also for a Christian? The simple answer is because we are all called to holiness. In the process of canonization, in order to recognize that someone has lived as a saint, the criterion is having lived a life of heroic virtues. Of course, Christ doesn't use the word virtue, but he speaks about all these elements of the virtue. He speaks about using our talents. He speaks about making an effort. For instance, enter by the narrow gate, or he says, the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence. Christ speaks about being faithful in the little things as a condition for the big and final fidelity. And Christ rejects hypocrisy and double life. And indeed, how is it possible that someone who claims to have a strong faith is always worrying? Or someone who claims to have a devotion to the saints but has never time to help a neighbor? Or someone who often quotes from the Bible but despises others' opinions? Or someone who defends Orthodox faith but judges others' intentions? Or someone who is active in the church but at home is lazy? So therefore we need those cardinal virtues. Saint Josemaria Escrivá, who is an expert in holiness in daily life, wrote once, "Many people neglect God because they had not the opportunity to listen to his words or have forgotten them. Yet their human dispositions are honest, loyal, compassionate, and sincere. I would go so far as to say that anyone possessing such qualities is ready to be generous with God, because human virtues are the foundation for the supernatural virtues." St. Paul writes to the Christians in Philippi, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." So Paul encourages us and invites us to think about those human qualities in the life of a Christian, especially the cardinal virtues. Pope Gregory the Great, at the end of the 6th century, released a list of 7 deadly sins. In contrast, he developed then also the 7 virtues: chastity, temperance, charity, diligence, patience, kindness, and humility. And practicing them is said to protect one against temptation from the 7 deadly sins. Against lust, chastity. Against gluttony, temperance. Against greed, charity. Against sloth, diligence. Against wrath, patience. Against envy, kindness. And against pride, humility. I wish you, at the end of this introduction, all the best with deepening your knowledge and practice of the virtues. May God bless you.